All right, let's get started. So good afternoon and welcome to our Alumni Insights webinar featuring John Grabenstein, graduate of the Duquesne University School of Pharmacy, who is returning for his second webinar to bring us up to date on what's happened with the coronavirus vaccines since his August appearance and how these vaccines fit into our lives. I'm Sarah Sphiri, the AVP of Alumni Engagement, and I'm excited to have you join us today. Before we jump into the introduction of our moderator and presenter, I'd like to take a moment to thank my colleague and alumna, Audrey Tierney, Associate Director of Alumni Engagement, for arranging for this program. Audrey will be managing the technical aspect of the webinar. Throughout the presentation, your microphones will be muted, but you're welcome to submit questions or comments through the chat feature found on the toolbar on the bottom of the screen. Pre-submitted questions and those received through the chat will be addressed, time permitting, following the presentation. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator. Doug Bricker, or Dean Bricker, as many of you know him, recently completed his 14-year tenure as Dean of the Duquesne School of Pharmacy. Dr. Bricker has been on the Duquesne faculty since 1985, so is a familiar face to many of the alumni taking part in the webinar today. During his tenure as dean, he initiated several new programs that were designed to enhance the mission of the school, improving health outcomes in patients and their communities. These included the Center for Pharmacy Care with employees, the Center for Pharmacy Services, and Giant Eagle Center for Pharmacy Practice. He introduced the Entrepreneur Program for students who needed to expand their innovative pharmacy ideas, and also expanded the global pharmacy education programs to include APPE rotations in Italy. Doug, I'll turn the program over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm so excited to be joining you once again as the moderator for this program, because John and I have known each other for many, many years. And I see the audience is kind of full of some of the graduates who graduated while in John's era. So we're so happy to see everybody here. And I know him to be a very excellent speaker who has put a lot of wit and humor in his presentations, as many of you know. But his expertise in vaccines is an outstanding accomplishment. I think you're in for a real treat today as John shares his insights into where we are with vaccines, which is on everyone's mind. John is a global vaccinologist, a pharmacist, a public health leader specializing in adult vaccines, implementation, and vaccine history. He has written more than 300 articles and 11 books. Today, he operates Vaccine Dynamics, a multifaceted consulting service. He's also the editor for the Immunization Action Coalition. John was the 2020 Remington Honor Medalist, and this is the highest honor that APHA bestows on any one individual for distinguished service. He was presented this in person just a few weeks ago. There are two other pharmacy alumni who gained this honor, Dean Hugh C. Muldoon and Dr. Joe Otis. After graduating from Duquesne University in pharmacy, John entered the armed forces and continued his education by receiving a master's degree in education from Boston University and a doctorate in epidemiology from the University of North Carolina. He has experience in over 50 countries and 50 ACIP meetings and has served on committees advising the HHS, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Commerce. As global director of medical affairs for Merck Vaccines, he led scientific exchange activities for a global enterprise annually, distributing greater than 180 million doses of 13 different vaccines. In order to reduce the burden of vaccine-preventable diseases around the world. His advocacy helped strengthen adult immunization programs on 6 continents. As a U.S. Army colonel, he directed the Department of Defense vaccination program for 9 million troops, retirees, and family members across 4 continents and dozens of ships at sea. He organized Immunization University to train clinicians across health disciplines across all continents. For these reasons and many more, I am happy to introduce Dr. John D. Grabenstein to give you information today about a much needed topic, and that is the coronavirus vaccine. John?
Doug, thanks very much. I appreciate the chance to be with you. The good news is that the technology lets us reach many more people outside of Pittsburgh. The bad news is I'm not able to get to Pittsburgh. We are not able to gather in Pittsburgh because of the pandemic. Now over a year old, as you're seeing in a lot of different contexts. The last presentation I gave, the previous presentation, was in August, middle of August, and 6+ months on, we've learned a whole lot, and I'll cover some of that. And yet the human nature pieces are just as they always have been. Human nature's fairly immutable. So let's talk about decision time now that there are vaccines available for us. And of course, the most important thing of all would be, how soon can we get to Pirates games and Steelers games? So let's see. Last August, I needed to start with an explanation of what was the difference between COVID-19 and coronavirus, and that's fairly known by just about everybody by now. SARS-CoV-2 is a little technical term for the very specific virus. That one doesn't tend to get in the newspapers quite so much. But if I slip in use that as the expression, that is the precise name of the specific coronavirus that causes this disease that we now know too much about, unfortunately. The other piece of nomenclature is to talk about what is a vaccine. And vaccines are just another category of medication. Some medications treat diabetes, some treat heart disease, and all sorts of things. Vaccines are medications that trigger an immune response within you that protects you from a specific disease or infection. It's interesting that vaccines are not actual protection. They don't protect directly. They induce the body to make the body immune, and that's sort of an interesting aspect of them. And vaccines have sometimes been called shadow boxing. It trains the body to be ready to ward off a future infection, a future exposure to a virus or a bacterium. Other than clean water, no other medical intervention has saved as many lives as vaccines have. Not antibiotics, not insulin, not kidney transplant drugs, not antihypertensives. It's vaccines that have saved the most lives. And we give vaccines to healthy people to keep them healthy. And for that reason, society has the highest expectations for safety of vaccines of any drug. I kid my colleagues who develop oncology drugs that they can get their drug through the FDA hoops, with a study of 800 or 1,000 people, but vaccines have to be studied in 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people studies. Vaccines are studied in larger populations to get through, to achieve FDA licensing relative to any other drug. And once they are licensed, vaccines are the subject of ongoing safety surveillance for as long as they are distributed. And I'll give you some details about that as we go through here and bring you up to date. This is the slide I showed last August of the burden of COVID cases and deaths. And just look at the global numbers: 20 million cases, 700 and some thousand deaths. And these are today's statistics, not 20-some thousand cases, or 20 million cases, 124 million cases, and not 700 and some thousand deaths, 2,700,000 deaths. And just what we have endured in the last 6-7 months has been amazing isn't quite the right word. Outrageous or devastating would be good words. When I talked with you back last August, we had just come through that summer spike, and we said to ourselves, wow, how bad that was. And then we couldn't predict the future, but what we went through post-Thanksgiving, post-Christmas, post-New Year's was this spike, or Alp or Rocky Mountain, if you will, relative to the foothills that we had that we thought was bad in summer of 2000. Now, fortunately, we have come down the slope, and you heard some voices saying, "Oh, well, it's almost over." It's not almost over. This level we're at now in March is just slightly lower than where we were in July. And so, and there is worry that this value, we can't predict the future. We don't know if this is going to go down with variants of the original virus that I'll talk about. The concern is that this may rise. And I have, oops, sorry. Okay, I have over here the Pennsylvania chart over the last few months. You see the holiday spike, and you can see over here in this tip an upturn there in the Pennsylvania numbers. And so the public health message to all this is keep wearing your masks, get that vaccine, and do the things that are needed to protect against this disease. What we didn't have back in August were usable vaccines, and now we do. And there are four major types, four mechanisms of action that I have in the columns here. And I'm just going to give you, several of you, imagine quite a few of you have already been vaccinated or are approaching getting vaccinated. So some of these, I'll give some of the numbers here so that it gives you a perspective of where any particular vaccine fits in with some of the others. The first two that were licensed by the FDA were sorry, not licensed, they were authorized for emergency use, which is just short of licensure, almost all the data in, but a different regulatory status, as those of you who are giving vaccine know from the forms that you're handing your patients. Messenger RNA is a relatively new technology, but has been, in terms of being a useful product, it's been researched for 10 or 15 years and was well studied just at the right time so it could be put to good use. The first one developed by a little company called BioNTech that partnered with Pfizer. The second company, Moderna, they each have, so there's two products here. These are synthesized in peptide synthesizers being used in a wide variety of countries, hundreds of millions of doses now administered. The Pfizer one was the ultra frozen product. They now have stability studies that can be merely frozen, and the same for Moderna. Very high efficacy. Shots hurt, and you're going to see similarity across the safety row and severe allergic reactions called anaphylaxis. They're one per every 200,000 or 300,000 doses, very rare. And so that's type 1. The second type are now vaccines that work by giving you an adenovirus, a different virus that causes the body to make a protein that induces that immunity I talked about. Janssen is the pharmaceutical division of Johnson & Johnson. They are the third product that's being used in the US, have been since March 1st. So they have about almost a month under their belt. University of Oxford has partnered with AstraZeneca. This is the one you're seeing in the news this week with some brouhaha over what exactly is its performance characteristics. These, unfortunately, are grown in human cells that have their origin in 2 abortions, one from each lineage, that go back into one from the 1970s, one from the 1980s. That raises some ethical issues, some moral issues that I'll talk about in some later slides. So just hold that thought for the moment. These are also now being used very widely around the world. They're probably at the tens of millions of doses administered stage, but that'll change pretty quickly. They can be refrigerated, which makes them easier to move around in rural areas or small quantities to this, this or that nursing home or building. 85% effective at preventing severe disease. That's the asterisks are here because it's hard to show one number that you can let you compare and contrast across the whole row. We can talk about that in Q&A, but a quite good vaccine. The AstraZeneca one is that's the brouhaha is, what's this number? Is it 69%, 74%, 79%? This morning's newspapers say 76%. Those numbers are all in a pretty good range, or pretty close. It's pretty short range, but the company is coming under criticism for maybe painting just a little bit more rosy picture than it deserves. We'll know for sure whether that's a proper description of the situation or not when the FDA reviews that data, because what the FDA does, if you've paid attention to the previous ones, is they show all the raw data, or you can calculate these numbers for yourself based on the original numbers. And if we get to that point, people will be able to judge that for themselves. Shots hurt, very, very similar adverse event profile, maybe a little bit milder in number and in severity than these others, but even then, this is not much of a basis for choosing one product over another, because if you have a severe muscle ache or severe malaise and you're a couch potato for a day, and then you're back to work, and it's in my humble opinion, a small price to pay to get protection from a very bad disease. There are some other products that are available in other countries, not in the US. Novavax is a company based out of Gaithersburg, Maryland, that had good data in a trial that they announced back at the end of January. They have not yet undergone FDA review, but will likely do so in the next month or two. Some other products that are made in, the top two are made in China. The Bharat is made in India. They have been used widely around the world, but have not yet submitted their data to the FDA. So these are, sorry, I forgot to mention the category. These are basically a single purified protein, in this case, a subunit of the whole virus, just the spike protein. And these are inactivated virus, whole virus. You see the characteristics there. But this is not just about the pharmacology or the immunology of the product. We also need to think about the sociology of the product. And part of sociology is where vaccines and religion intersect. So let me begin to come back to those embryonic cells that I talked about. So let me start with an end. I'll start and end this section with the same slide, which is to say, Pope Francis thinks it's a good idea to get vaccinated. And this was January 9th when he made this statement. And he basically said, you have an ethical obligation to get vaccinated. And why would that be so? Because for most all of us, somebody is depending on us. Our children depend on us. Our parents depend on us. Our colleagues at work depend on us. Our patients depend on us. Or in some way, we have an obligation to others. So this is not just me avoiding disease. It's me avoiding disease so that I can help others. And then he said, refusing to get vaccine can be considered suicidal. And if you got into the detail of what he was saying, it has to do with this obligation to others. That by deciding to forego protection, we leave ourselves vulnerable to when we don't have to, and so he's definitely pro-vaccine. Now, let me go into these cell lines. They have an origin in two aborted fetuses, intentionally aborted fetuses, but specifically two. back from the 70s, and one from the 70s, one from the 80s. There are some other vaccines that are made with 2 other cell lines, so it's a total of 4, but which causes us to go back to 2008 when the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith said accepting these vaccines could contribute to an indifference to abortion. But on the other hand, the danger from the infections to be prevented, the danger to the health of children, in the case of in this particular paragraph I'm quoting, could permit parents to use the vaccines that that come from cell lines of illicit origin. But you need to make your disagreement known. And if the health systems have a choice, they should pick other types of vaccines to prevent those diseases when they are available. Now, in all of this, these are multi-page documents, and they're written very technically. So I'm just pulling out some selected quotes, and I'm paraphrasing it in what I'm saying out loud. So feel free to go read the detail, and then I'm going to show you a really hyper summary when we get to the end. Now, with regard to COVID vaccines, the Vatican has a COVID commission, and there is the Pontifical Academy for Life, and they considered the COVID-19 vaccine specifically, and they said you can use any of those vaccines with a clear conscience, and the use of these vaccines does not mean that you, as a vaccine recipient, are cooperating with a voluntary abortion. And this is why the Pope says he wants you to be vaccinated. And part of that is the refusal to be vaccinated means you're a risk to others. So it's not just about your choice. It's about the implications of your choice for people near you, people in your pew at church, people in your family, people in your workplace. And so this interdependency is pretty salient. Here we go, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. While having ourselves and our families immunized against COVID-19 is morally permissible and can be an act of self-love and charity towards others, that's you doing something good for others by being vaccinated yourself, we must not allow the gravely immoral nature of abortion to be obscured. So we should talk about this. We should make apparent, what it is we're objecting to, but while getting vaccinated. And then a Q&A document from January. It is morally acceptable to receive the vaccine that uses abortion-derived cell lines if there are no other available vaccines comparable in safety and efficacy with no connection. If it is possible to choose, the vaccine with the least connection should be chosen. That's sort of obvious. And unfortunately, there are degrees of gray, that there are some that are produced with these cell lines, some where the cell line had some role in a test, an assay that's used in either in the invention stage or in the quality control stage, and so there's a degrees of gray issue, but none of them are absolutely black, none of them are red, none of them are absolutely forbidden. If you have a choice, you should choose a more ethical one. And then here's one from the National Catholic Bioethics Center. No one being vaccinated had any meaningful role in the abortions. This fact, along with the grave dangers to life and health that is COVID-19, caused the Vatican and the US bishops to say, people can use any available vaccine with a clear conscience, but with a duty to express their opposition. So what did they all, so legalese, but in plain English, what did they say? Object, complain, make noise, write letters about use of, the fancy technical terms are HEK 293 and per C6 cells. That's in these documents. So complain about it and let it be known you wish this wasn't so. If you have a choice, and most folks won't have a choice for many months to come, choose the least connected option. But there is no obligation to wait to have a choice, and waiting leaves you vulnerable and suicidal to an extent. It is willfully letting yourself be vulnerable to infection that could kill you and that would be not good for the people who depend on you, not to mention yourself. So the diseases are dangerous. Get yourself vaccinated, avoid the infection to protect your own life. So these historical abortions were bad things. And I wish with all my heart that they had never happened, but they did. Now, what do we do about it? We should protect our own lives. We should protect others. That's the charity mention. And it's because of these reasons, others depend on you. And if you stay vulnerable, you can be the source of infection and infect others and cause their death. And that's obviously not good either. And so I come back to the big guy and his comments about vaccination as an ethical obligation. So there's more to sociology than just religion. And so this is an old Beetle Bailey cartoon where Sergeant Snorkel is offered a vaccine, or he's offered to pick his arm, and by Doc, and he grabs Beetle Bailey's arm and he says, stick it in this one. This is a cartoon I showed back in August. This is what I call the Internet of 1802. This was a political satire cartoon complaining about smallpox, or making fun of people who complained about smallpox vaccination, cowpox vaccination. You see these cowls appearing in people's appendages out of the body in various places. It was also a social critique about giving away vaccine for free to poor people, for using taxpayers' money to take care of to give healthcare to the poor. So it's satire, but it speaks to a bunch of the complaints that people have had about vaccines for over 200 years, 220 years. But the history is full of stories of terrible disease burdens that have been overcome by vaccination. And the iron lung of polio, and Jonas Salk stamp, quarantine, which we have seen in recent months, refreshed in our own example. Rubella as a German measles as a cause of birth defects. And so the March of Dimes was, when the rubella vaccine first became available, advocating for rubella vaccination. This is Elvis Presley getting polio vaccine. I've used this slide for many years. I didn't realize until this year, this is just moments before he went on stage and performed for the Ed Sullivan Show. And so if he wasn't worried about vaccination, I encourage you not to be worried about vaccination and to get yourself protected. This is the New York Times front page, February 25th. And what have we got here? This is percent change in the percent of deaths compared to this date, the date of the first vaccinations. And what you see here is that the COVID deaths total in the US continued to rise through that January peak that I showed you in a different way earlier, but the proportion of deaths in nursing home residents dropped precipitously. Why? The first doses of vaccine were rushed to nursing homes because they were such a high, COVID-19 was such a high burden of death in those settings. And so who did this work to save these lives? America's pharmacists and America's nurses. And in the pharmacists in a special way, because they were the ones entrusted with getting it to those facilities with those observing the ultra cold storage temperatures. So this is a huge accomplishment for society by some of Duquesne's graduates and health professions, people from all across the country. And shout out to our neighbors in West Virginia for their role modeling work in getting their own people protected so quickly down there. Just a remarkable achievement. So let's keep going and talk about safety. And you saw this play out over the last few weeks, mainly a European question of whether that AstraZeneca vaccine was causing blood clots or not, and at what rate. And so let's start with cause and effect. I got vaccinated 2 weeks ago and I got sick a week ago. Did the vaccine make me sick? Well, it's a temporal association. It's an association in time, but is it a cause and effect relationship? Maybe, maybe not. You need more data. And just because I got vaccinated and I want to blame whatever happened on the vaccine is not, people do it all the time, but it's not scientifically proper. And it's such a common human foible that there's a Latin phrase for it. The posthoc, ergo propter hoc, fallacy. It happened after, therefore it happened because of. I washed my car and it rained. No, your washing the car didn't cause it to rain. It's a happen chance. So the swine flu program of 1976 is a great example, and it's a Pittsburgh example. One false alarm and one true alarm. The false alarm was that the flu vaccine of 1976 was brought into Pittsburgh, and there was a big citywide program, and 3 people got vaccinated and then died of a heart attack later that same day, all in Pittsburgh. And red lights went off, and bells and whistles went off, and people were headlines in the newspapers and that kind of thing. But when they stopped to think about it, wait a minute, how many people die of a heart attack in Pittsburgh every day? The obituaries are full every day. The hospitals have these deaths every day. And the answer was 10 or 12 every day in Pittsburgh or something like that, but it was way more than 3. And so this was not a cause and effect relationship. It was not related to vaccine. It was not higher than the background rate. 3 was not surprising. A month later, there's reports of Guillain-Barré syndrome in influenza vaccine recipients. This is a neuromuscular paralysis syndrome. It's quite serious. At first, there was one case, and then there was another, and then there was another, and then there was another. And over time, they realized that there were 4 times as many GBS cases, Guillain-Barré syndrome cases, in vaccinated people relative to unvaccinated people. And that 4 times higher factor is what leads us to say it's caused by the vaccine. And so the pandemic of influenza didn't materialize, and so this vaccination program was stopped early. But yet, so that blood clotting situation in Europe last week is, which category does that fall in? Is it higher than an expected rate? Well, maybe only if you look at some subsets, and or is it now we're seeing what we are used to seeing? It's just that a bunch of them are vaccinated, and I don't think what happened is that the European Medicines Agency basically said, we don't think it's a cause and effect relationship, but even if it were, it would be overwhelmed by the burden of the COVID-19 deaths. So please continue your vaccination program. I think the ultimate answer is on the cause and effect part remains to be seen. But the point was that the current pandemic in Europe is of much greater magnitude than this side effect, and so continue the vaccination program. It's important to separate true causes from false causes, both for societal reasons and individual reasons. If the vaccine is guilty, maybe the vaccine should come off the market. Maybe there's enough disease that a warning is sufficient, and because the benefit of the vaccine might still be outweighing the risk of the vaccine. And if it's innocent, you let the vaccination program continue. And it's a matter of separating wheat from chaff. Any of you who are pilots know, if you're flying on instruments, you're supposed to disregard what your mind tells you. Your emotion, your sensory perception can get disrupted, and what is really happening may not be what you think is happening may not be what is really happening, and you should rely on the instruments. And so this is a show me the objective numbers approach that is what is happening in Europe right now. So humanity has fears and anxieties, and this sometimes causes vaccine hesitancy. Trust and confidence are the opposite of that, but the trust and confidence need to be earned, justified, supported by the facts. And so it's important as a matter of respect to listen to the person's fears and anxieties and hear them out, and work to earn their trust and build confidence. And so we will, I was commenting earlier today, we're at a point right now where there are more people who want vaccine than there is supply, but we will get in a month or two to a place where there's more supply than there is demand, or people are hesitant or not sure, or you go first kinds of things. And so there'll be some additional communications that are needed to to work on this. So it's important to provide facts, but facts alone are not enough. In that the relationship of the public to their pharmacist, the public to their nurse, their physician, their healthcare worker, the medical assistant who lives down the street. They are all trusted authorities, and there are authorities of a variety of sorts in your communities, of course. And so how do you help them? Well, you listen, and I'm going to go through pose some questions and then give some answers, and I'm going to do it wrong. I'm going to do it too quickly. I'm going to do it without listening to you or your question. But I want to convey a bunch of information to coach you and to help you, but it's not the way I would do it if I was really talking to an individual patient. I would do it much slower than this. How do we know if the vaccines are safe? Well, they've been studied in the largest studies. Did you know that vaccines are studied in the largest studies of any medication? Over 30,000 volunteers, 40,000 volunteers in some of these studies. All the best, most thorough representation of Hispanics, of African Americans, of Asian Americans, of any vaccine trials to date. People with heart disease and lung disease, people over 65, people under 65, et cetera. That 30 or 40,000 is about the same number of people who were studied in this vaccine against zoster, vaccine against shingles. Shingrix is the brand name of it. These vaccines were rushed. Well, they were accelerated, but no safety steps were skipped. And it wasn't the politicians who approved the vaccine, it was the career scientists. And so that's how we know they're safe, and there's all that ongoing monitoring that I mentioned. I've heard that these vaccines cause a lot of side effects. Well, the most common side effects are, and you list them, and I did for you in an earlier slide, and about 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 people will, be laid up on the couch for a day because they can't lift their arms, or they just have this malaise that's so strong and so pervasive. And you probably have heard these stories from yourself, maybe, or family members, or people you know. But the important thing is, in public confidence, is you tell the truth, and you tell them, you give them facts, and you empower the other person. Most people who do not have serious problems after being vaccinated, this is 9 out of 10 or 19 out of 20 don't have it. Your arm is shots hurt. Your arm's gonna be sore, red, warm to the touch. Those symptoms can last a few days, and then you're gonna have many months, perhaps years of protection from a disease that can kill. Could these vaccines have long-term side effects? Well, let's be honest. It takes a while to build up, long-term safety data, but we now have millions and millions and millions of people's worth of experience from December and January, and that body of data just keeps growing. Long delayed side effects. That Guillain-Barré story that I told you, all those cases, or essentially all the cases, happened within 42 days after vaccination. So if there was a Guillain-Barré syndrome by now, That would be from January 1st, that's the middle of February. All those folks vaccinated in January, we can be pretty sure that, we'd have seen the Guillain-Barré by now with the surveillance that's going on. And that's you always keep your eyes open, you always keep your ears open, you never dismiss the possibility that something could happen, but so far so good. All the signals are good, and that's what the data that's been shown to the CDC. The FDA and the CDC look at this multiple ways. They bring in university professors and the like to review the data. Hey, that mRNA stuff is new. It's never been in vaccines before. It's going to mess with my DNA. Well, mRNA, messenger ribonucleic acid, is in your body right now. If we took the mRNA out of your body and you cut your finger, you couldn't heal that cut. If we took the mRNA out of your children, they wouldn't grow any taller. mRNA is a natural bodily function, a bodily component, and scientists have figured out how to harness it to make it useful to protect you from disease. The trials go back well over a decade. Now, a lot of them are small, but they were extremely well controlled. A lot of NIH studies, a lot of cancer chemotherapy attempts to use mRNA. And we now have two that are showing a great value as vaccines. And so that's where we stand. Oh, so think of an egg. The yolk is the nucleus, the white is the cytoplasm. The mRNA vaccines don't go into the nucleus, don't go into the yolk. They stay out in the white and the cytoplasm. They don't change your DNA, which is inside the yolk, the nucleus. People are asking about children and schools reopening and that sort of thing. So right now there are studies underway in adolescents, basically 12 to 17-ish ages. And vaccines are studied in a stepwise fashion. First, they'll do the adolescents, then they'll go down into the school-age kids, and then not toddlers, young kids, and then really young kids, and step by step. And right now they've got to work through. Work through each of these before they get down to the really youngest kids. This is, COVID-19, very frankly, is mainly an adult disease, but not solely, as you've heard, stories of kids who died of the infection. There'll be these studies don't have to be as big, don't have to run as long, because the scientists will be measuring the antibody response to the vaccine, not looking for the disease reduction. And as long as the kids make antibody levels at least as high as the adults, the vaccine will be usable. That's almost always true, but it'll be that needs to be checked. What's the right dose for these kids? Well, you give the same amount of tetanus toxoid you give to a 2-month-old baby is the amount you give to an NFL football player. So in that case, it's the same. But with some vaccines like hepatitis B vaccine, you give a little bit less to really little kids compared to older kids or adults. How many doses are needed? What's the, will vaccinating kids reduce their ability to spread the virus? Those are all things that will be assessed as time goes by. But I would, one of the preliminary questions was when will kids get vaccinated going back to school in the fall? I would expect that the high schoolers are going to get offered vaccine. I don't think they'll be required, but my hunch is that high schoolers are probably going to get offered vaccine by the fall. So let's see, lots of resources for you. This is cdc.gov coronavirus, and then a wacky collection of words. But there's lots of resources available for the general public. Notice that little button is languages, and so if you need materials in Spanish or Russian or Arabic or whatever, you've got a big collection of language resources there as well. And the same is true for the FDA fact sheets that are, when I went checking last weekend, they're available in like at least 18 languages. So if you're working in a community of immigrants, the odds are that you can have some resources that are tailor-made for them. And then resources for health professionals. Each of these rectangles down here leads to another 10 or 20 pages worth of materials. And we just, at IAC, we keep track of all the things that are being added so that we can keep our readers informed, the vaccinators informed, and this collection of resources just keeps growing by leaps and bounds. Boosters and variants. I'm going to do a little explanation of that. I made a quip the other day that if people are putting booster and variant in the same sentence, they're probably making a mistake. And then somebody pointed out to me that Tony Fauci did that, but yeah, I would say he was being sloppy. He wasn't being clear. So with the average vaccine, immunity lasts maybe 5 to 10 years. There are examples that are less than that. Flu vaccine needed every year. Pertussis vaccine doesn't last as long as we would like. Tetanus and rabies are in the middle. Measles or papillomavirus or yellow fever, after the initial series, the protection is decades long, maybe lifelong. We could have, if immunity wears off, you can have waning immunity or breakthrough infection. But if it persists, you've got persistence, you've got durability. And what happens if you're at the short end? Well, you repeat the vaccination and it boosts, it restores the immunity. And so we talk about tetanus booster doses every 10 years. And boost is sort of the way the curve looks of the antibody response. And that's the origin of that word in this context. So if the vaccines that people are getting now are long-lived, long durable, we won't need booster doses because they are, that protective. But if they're not, if they're more at this end, then maybe we need a repeat dose every year or every X years, 2, 3, 4, 5. That we don't have enough, not enough time has elapsed, and we just need to wait to figure that out, and then we can know what the right policy is, clinical policy is about boosting intervals. In contrast, so different color, different issue. If the virus changes, then maybe we need a different vaccine, and I'm calling it a supplemental vaccine or an extra vaccine, and against this variant. It's just enough of a difference in the virus that we need a new vaccine. And did you know that when you get a flu shot, you're actually getting 4 different influenza vaccines? When you get polio vaccine, your kids do, they're actually getting 3 different polio vaccines. Well, are we going to need, the original SARS-CoV-2 vaccine and a UK variant and a South African variant and who knows what? That it's not clear enough whether that's going to be needed or not. It's a big policy decision because if we need 2 components, then we need twice as much industrial capacity to make the vaccine, and there's not enough industrial capacity right now. And so this is a big deal. And there are lots of people watching it and doing lab studies and getting the preliminary candidate products ready that could be tested further and that sort of thing. So that's all the prudent preparatory steps. Whether we, do we need boosters, or how often do I need a booster? I don't know yet. We don't know yet. Do we need extra vaccination against the variants? We don't know yet. So they're both, we don't know, but they're 2 different constructs. And so, will the flu vaccine and will you need to get a SARS-CoV-2 booster every time you go in for a flu shot? Maybe, maybe not. We just don't know yet. So we just gotta wait. So let's head towards wrapping up here. What I want you to do is think about vaccine. So get yourself COVID-19 vaccine as fast as you can, and for everybody you love as well. The ones you don't love, you don't have to know. That would not be a very Christian thing. So get as many people vaccinated as you can, but don't just think about flu shot season. Think about pneumococcal disease causing death and infection all 12 months of the year. And tetanus causes infection all 12 months of the year. And eventually we'll be traveling all sorts of times. And so think about vaccination all year round. What's over here in yellow in these boxes is what I call the menu. Think about all the diseases you might be vulnerable to, not just COVID-19, not just flu, not just tetanus. There's a list, a menu of things you should take advantage of to keep you healthy and your loved ones healthy. And Doug, let's see what questions might have come in from the world out there.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we did get a few questions in from our audience, but I would like to touch on one that we spoke about a little bit earlier, and that is the relationship with vaccines and breast cancer.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so the list of injection site reactions I showed you is true. And sometimes people can get a swollen lymph node under the arm, on the side. If they got injected here in the arm, one of these lymph nodes can swell. Well, if you're a woman who is about to get a mammogram, one of the things that the mammogram is searching for is swollen lymph nodes. And so you could have a false positive, an alarm go off with your mammogram results. And so people get mammograms for different reasons. It could be a routine screening mammogram. It could be a cancer follow-up mammogram. Separating these in time, telling you, the radiologist or the tech, I just got a vaccination and it was on this side, that sort of thing. So that's the relationship to breast cancer. It's not that vaccination causes breast cancer, it's that a side effect is a swollen lymph node. It's only going to be swollen for a week or two, and then it dissipates. But if you have the mammogram in that time, it could be falsely alarming.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. A lot of good information. It's going to take a while for some of it to sink in, and thank goodness this is being recorded and we can watch it again at some time. One of the questions that came in, first of all, congratulate you for a great talk and nice to see you. Can you comment on your thoughts on how regulators will deal with authorizing additional vaccines once placebo-controlled trials cannot be done because of vaccines are available? Do you think that the immunobridging or COP will be the basis of authorization and or licensing?
COP, correlative protection. So the FDA is going to probably get a fourth, maybe a fifth product to review in the next month or two. And one of the justifications for an EUA is there enough supply? And at the moment we have shortages. We don't have as much vaccine as we want. And remember my comments about if we need a vaccine against a variant, we need more capacity. So we would be even further behind if we suddenly realized we needed 2 vaccines or a bivalent vaccine. So then the point of this question was, well, there's also an issue of once the original vaccines get fully licensed, is it ethical to give somebody a placebo, saline, during the course of the clinical trial against a lethal infection? And so if the only way around the placebo control to know if your vaccine works is if you can say, well, let's make sure my hand's on the camera here. If you get this much, if you get above this much antibody, this is the correlative protection. And if you have more than this much antibody, it's good and you're protective. But if you have less than that much antibody, it's bad. You're not protective. Where do we draw the line? Do we draw it here or here or here? And that's what's unknown. We don't know what that correlate is, that substitute. And so there's a variety of folks, NIH and the manufacturers, trying to come to consensus on what that number is. They don't have it yet. It'll be important down the road to get additional products licensed. With the kids, I mentioned the children. Let me use the other hand. We know that adults make this much, as long as the kids make more than that much, that's not a correlate, that's just non-inferiority to the adult antibody level. And so it's a little bit different issue.
Very good. Thanks, Deborah, for that question. There was another comment actually about Western PA Armstrong County having vaccines available, and Audrey did put in the chat how you can actually contact that area. So I won't reiterate that, but everyone can see that in the chat. Okay.
So Maryland. So I was telling Doug the story. I found out Maryland has finally authorized age 60 and above. So last night I got a text saying that my pre-registration worked and I could go get my COVID-19 vaccine at this hour. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I gotta do this webinar. So I'm getting vaccinated tomorrow.
Very good. Okay, and another question comes in. Does being vaccinated prevent you from being a carrier? Do you anticipate that this vaccine will be similar to the flu in that we will need to be vaccinated annually against new strains? You kind of answered this, but maybe you want to go over it one more time.
Yeah, so do we need to get an annual shot? It depends on how durable the protection is. And then the other reason you get a flu shot every year is the vaccine or the virus changes, it morphs, it mutates. And so between the two of those, we need a flu shot annually. We know the answer to neither of those questions with SARS-CoV-2. Then the carriage question is a third question. And that's there's some preliminary studies with 3 or 4 of the vaccines that if you're vaccinated, they find virus in your nose less often, and then the presumption is therefore you can spread it less often or less easily. And one of the vaccines had a result where there were fewer asymptomatic infections. People's blood tests turned positive. They had the virus at some point, but they never had symptoms. And so there's tantalizing suggestions that the vaccine reduces transmission, but it's not quite as good a proof as the disease avoidance.
Thank you, John, very much for answering these questions. We have less than 2 minutes. John has another obligation at 1 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and hopefully most of your questions were answered, and continue to review this webinar.
Thank you, John. We'll let you get out of here so you can make it to your 1 o'clock, but we appreciate you giving up your vaccine time slot and coming and spending the hour with us, and continue carrying on the mission of Duquesne and everyday work. So thank you.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Doug.
Doug, thank you for your expert moderating skills and your assistance with this program today. As always, it's great to work with you. Thank you to all of our alumni and friends for attending today's Alumni Insights. In a follow-up email, all participants will receive a copy of the recording of this program that you can refer to and share. In addition, there'll be a link in to provide feedback on the program today. We hope you'll take a minute to provide your commentary on today's webinar. If you are an alumnus you know is interested in presenting an Alumni Insights program, a link to the presenter application will be in a follow-up email. Hope you have a great day, stay safe, and as always, go Dukes. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.